is the National.
I was one of you. I grew up on the hockey rink and spent my teenage years on stage playing guitar.
ISIS trolls for Canadian converts in its new video. We have the exclusive details about the Ottawa man turned recruiter. When his daughter was stalked by an online predator, a Toronto man turned the tables and cyber-stalked him. Will and Kate arrive in New York to adoring fans. David Common explains how their star power turns into money. And as police walk free after killing unarmed black men, white people start confessing all the things they get away with. Our Sunday panel digs into the politics of privilege. Born and raised here, now a poster boy for an extremist group. A Canadian is the latest propaganda mouthpiece for ISIS and the voice behind a direct threat to Canadians. Join or expect reprisal for attacking ISIS. Our senior correspondent Adrian Arsenault has our story tonight, including exclusive details on who this Canadian is, as well as his circle of friends.
The new ISIS threats are aimed at Canada and delivered by a Canadian, a man calling himself Abu Anwar al-Kanadi. It's 6 minutes and 13 seconds of venom.
So it should not surprise you when operations by the Muslims are executed where it hurts you the most, on your very own soil, in retaliation to your unprovoked acts of aggression towards our people. You have absolutely no right to live in a state of safety and security when your country is carrying out atrocities.
He praises the recent attacks in Ottawa and Quebec and berates Muslims who live in Canada. It wasn't always this fierce. His name is John Douglas McGuire from Ottawa. One family member, too frightened to be identified, sent us this statement. This young man is definitely John Douglas, but not the John Douglas that we knew, loved, and remember. You cannot imagine how badly I feel that I did not realize or understand what was going on at the time. Could anyone? It appears he was in the sights of authorities before he reportedly left for Syria on a one-way ticket in January 2013. Someone who knew him as a fresh convert says the video and the message in it sickens him.
What makes me the most angry is that it's actually reinforcing things like Islamophobia, xenophobia, and it's reinforcing paranoia and fear of people who decide to convert to Islam.
So was McGuire radicalized on his own, as so many allegedly are? Not necessarily. CBC has learned that of the circle McGuire moved in Ottawa, a handful of others have either left to fight with extremist groups too, or have social media profiles now dripping in ISIS propaganda. Among them, Abdul Baki Hanif, who was a friend of McGuire's. That young men in particular often move in clusters before joining groups like ISIS isn't a new phenomenon. We saw it with the Calgary cluster of foreign fighters, and the pattern repeats across Canada. And that ISIS would use Canadians to both recruit and threaten isn't new either. It was Canadian Andre Poulin who was among the first ISIS video recruiters.
I was like any other regular Canadian. I watched hockey, I went to the cottage in the summertime, I love to fish.
The normal hockey-loving guy approach being used again now.
I was one of you. I was a typical Canadian. I grew up on the hockey rink and spent my teenage years on stage playing guitar.
Talking of his Canadian identity in the past tense, we've also seen this before.
We will destroy you.
Ferris Sheardon dramatically burning his passport in an ISIS ceremony. And a Quebec jihadist believed to be in Syria, dubbed El Sami, held his own ceremony, shooting, then burning his Canadian passport, making perfectly clear the idea that there's no turning back for them now. There likely isn't for McGuire either. Curiously, neither he, nor Sheardon, nor El Sami have ever been charged with terrorism offenses. Not yet.
And Adrian joins me in studio now. So, Adrian, the Minister of Public Safety reacted to this. Here's a part of what Stephen Blaney said today. Terrorism remains a real and serious threat to Canadians, which is why we must remain vigilant. That is why we're taking part in the coalition that is currently conducting airstrikes against ISIL. So he's not directly addressing the Canadians in the video, but how seriously are authorities taking this?
Oh, I would say they're taking it and him and several of the others very seriously, have been long before blood was shed. in this country. The fears have always been twofold, that Canadians overseas fighting for ISIS would come back and commit attacks here, or that frustrated Canadians who want to go to ISIS and can't get out of the country would act out here. We have seen exactly that happen.
There's been calls for direct action from ISIS before. Do they tend to work?
You know, mercifully, no. ISIS has shout-outs and call-outs all the time, and they don't always work. We've been watching them try to recruit actively in Ferguson, Missouri, trying to say to African Americans, look how the United States is treating you. Your only way out is to join us and to join ISIS. There has been zero traction on that call-out. So a little bit of perspective. It doesn't always work. I think we have to remember, though, that there are still some people who sympathize with the likes of John McGuire, and so you can bet there are some very worried souls in Ottawa today.
Thanks so much, Adrian. Adrian Arsenault. More details are emerging tonight about a failed rescue attempt in Yemen that ended in the deaths of 2 hostages. An American and a South African were shot by al-Qaeda militants just as U.S. Navy SEALs were closing in. Paul Hunter has the details from Washington.
To give you a sense of what it might have looked like yesterday morning, these images from the U.S. military are from another rescue attempt in Yemen just last month. It too failed. Both times, U.S. forces tried to free American photojournalist Luke Summers. On that first attempt, they couldn't find him. This weekend, they did. But, says the U.S., al-Qaeda militants shot Summers before he could be rescued. He soon died.
This time, they were unable to save Luke.
Today, U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, visiting American troops in Afghanistan, defended U.S. rescue procedures.
Is it imperfect? Yes. Is there risk? Yes. But we start with the fact that we have an American that's being held hostage, and that American's life is in danger. That's where we start. And then we proceed from there.
I'm certain that my life is in danger. So as I sit here now, I ask, if anything can be done, please let it be done.
Indeed, when this video of Summers came out Thursday, it included a threat from al-Qaeda he'd be killed within 3 days. The U.S. says it had to act fast. But Summers wasn't the only hostage. South African teacher Pierre Corky was also killed in yesterday's failed rescue. A South African relief group says it had by then negotiated Corky's release. He was to have been freed today.
It was really shocking, especially since the last week, I know Yolandi, which is Pierre's wife, that we would have Pierre home for Christmas.
The U.S. says it was unaware of any deal to free the South African, or even who was with Summers when Barack Obama gave the go-ahead for the attempted rescue. Corky's wife, an aid worker, had been held hostage along with her husband, but she was released in January. Today, Yolande Corky said she forgives her husband's killers. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Here at home, a nation still mourns Jean Beliveau. All day, people waited in the cold to pay their respects, fittingly at the Bell Centre, where the Montreal Canadiens play.
Jean Beliveau was my first favorite hockey player when I was 4 years old, and I started to watch hockey with my dad.
It's to pay respect to a legend, but also to somebody who is so human. It's more than a hockey player. It's somebody that symbolizes a whole society.
The kind of person you would like your kids to grow up to be, the kind of citizen everyone wishes they could be.
CBC News Network will have live coverage of Belivau's funeral on Wednesday, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. More farms are under quarantine. More countries are restricting Canadian poultry, and 80,000 birds have already been destroyed. The CBC's Greg Rasmussen now with the latest on the avian flu outbreak in BC's Fraser Valley.
At Vancouver's Granville Island Market, the display cases are full of local chicken and turkey. Although customers are aware of the avian flu outbreak, it's not stopping them from buying.
It's not a need for alarm. Good caution, absolutely, it has to go out there to people. But no, I'm not concerned at all.
I don't think there's a great deal of need to get worried so much at the moment.
Still, most of these birds come from BC's Fraser Valley, where now 5 farms have been hit with the virus.
The farm is under strict biosecurity lockdown, so there is security at the driveway, nothing going in, nothing going out.
The most serious outbreak of avian influenza hit farmers here in 2004. By the time it was contained, 17 million chickens, turkeys, and other birds had to be destroyed. Each newly diagnosed case is a major setback for BC's poultry industry. Each one of these barns contains tens of thousands of birds. All must now be disposed of in a compost heap rather than sent to the dinner table. Suppliers say so far only a small percentage of the poultry supply has been directly affected, and a turkey shortage this holiday season is unlikely. But international reaction has been swift. The United States, Mexico, and several other countries have implemented full or partial bans on Canadian poultry products. All this is taking a toll on local producers, who are supposed to be busy getting turkeys to market rather than culling their flocks.
We are tired, as you can imagine, but the mood is positive. We want to keep moving. We want to work together still and try to keep this thing under control.
Avian influenza is found in migratory wild stocks like these. It's unclear at this point, but officials say it's possible the disease was transmitted into these barns from the flocks above. Greg Rasmussen, CBC News, Abbotsford, BC.
The Christmas lights are up on Parliament Hill, and by Friday, not a creature will be stirring inside the house. National Affairs editor Chris Hall joins us from Ottawa now. So, Chris, a tough couple of weeks. What are you going to watch for this week?
Well, certainly not a lot of time to leave a positive and lasting impression for the holidays Monday for the government. So expect the opposition to continue to press in the Commons for the removal of Veterans Affairs Minister Julian Fantino, saying he's lost the trust and confidence of Canada's war vets. And they'll also be after the government's climate change record. There's another embattled cabinet member, Environment Minister Leona Agluka, attends a UN climate change summit in Lima, Peru, with no new targets and no new commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the government, on the other hand, will have its own agenda away from the Commons, beginning with an announcement in Kiev tomorrow by Defense Minister Rob Nicholson on additional support for Ukraine.
And then you're all back at the end of January. What will you be watching for then?
Well, everything will be viewed through the prism of the 2015 election, Wendy, but let me highlight a couple of things. First, the government will press ahead with new measures to combat homegrown terrorism. Second, the budget. It will be Finance Minister Joe Oliver's first, and he has to deliver on another surplus despite much lower oil prices and a possible slowdown in new energy projects. And then there's the Senate. The Auditor General is expected to release his audits of every senator in March, just before Mike Duffy stands trial in April on charges of influence peddling and fraud. We expect Nigel Wright and other former senior members of the Prime Minister's office to testify in a trial that's scheduled to last 2 full months.
Thanks so much, Chris. Chris Hall is our National Affairs editor. Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne is standing up for sex workers. One day after Canada's new prostitution law took effect, Wynne said she fears it will put prostitutes in danger, just like the old law. She wants her Attorney General to advise on whether the new law is constitutionally valid. But she did confirm the law will be enforced in Ontario.